Frog fans, can TCU make a deep run in March Madness? We have Isacc Shade with us from Locked On College Basketball, also part of Locked On Tar Heels. We'll discuss that next. This is Locked On Horned Frogs.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is your team every day. It's Locked On Horned Frogs. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. Thanks for making Locked On Horned Frogs your first listen. You can subscribe to us wherever it is you get your podcast or on YouTube. Would love for you to subscribe to the YouTube channel. And today we have a special guest with us. So Isacc Shade is joining us. Isaac hosts our Locked On College Basketball podcast, also hosts Locked On Heels. And Isaac, I'm sure this is – I would imagine this is like the best and maybe the most stressful week of the year for you. Is that accurate?
That is a very accurate statement, Stephen. I wish I had kept track of all the shows and podcasts and things I've done this week, but man, I love it. It's the best time of the year. I don't know where I put it. I got my Santa hat for tomorrow for the first day of the tournament. We're ready to go.
We are, and so this is funny, man. TCU is kind of in an interesting position. This is sort of new to the people that followed the Horned Frogs. Like 3 tournament appearances under Jamie Dixon now, but it's the first time they've been in consecutive years since the 52-53 season. So it's been a while since we've had a team with like expectations, and I would say they've met that so far. But I guess in all your years of watching the tournament, covering it now. When you look at this TCU team, got a really good player in Mike Miles, have some other talented guards. Is this the type of roster? Is this the type of collection of talent that it has the potential to make a deep run in the NCAA tournament?
I would say yes, but I would also say as deep as it would have been with Eddie Lampkin, no. And so that, I mean, obviously that's going to be a major storyline for the Frogs here in the postseason. But here's the thing. We see this all the time in sports, right? Where teams lose a player late in the season, they kind of circle the wagons and bring stuff together. I mean, so since Eddie Lampkin's last game, TCU is 3-2 with wins over Texas Tech, Texas, and K-State, right? And so, I mean, and so for me, ultimately, even with losing Lampkin, here's the 2 biggest feathers in the cap for the Frogs. Number one, this is a tried and true tested principle. You said in all my years of watching, well, one of the things is this: guards win in March. And anytime you got 2 dudes named Mike Miles and Damian Baugh, you're going to be in good shape, assuming that Mike Miles can stay healthy, right? That's been a storyline all season long. And then here's a second principle you can take to the bank. Defense wins in March too. And we know that a Jamie Dixon team, especially this one, is going to defend really well. So that said, I think this team is deep enough and talented enough to probably overcome anything lost with Lampkin.
They also have the unique situation of they still don't know who their first round opponent is. We'll find out tonight, and Arizona State and Nevada are going to square off. But I guess for our viewers and listeners, could you give folks just a Cliff Notes version of what to expect with those 2 teams, and maybe if there's one that you think would be a better matchup for TCU?
For sure. Well, these are the last 2 teams in the field. I think Nevada's resume was the better of the 2. Most people expected them to not get in, and that it would be either Rutgers or Oklahoma State ahead of them. And so there is that side of things. Let's start with Arizona State, because they're the team that I trust least of the 2. Defense is their calling card. That's Bobby Hurley, right? Like if anyone remembers him playing at Duke, like that's what he does. They're 29th in the nation in defensive efficiency at KenPom. They have the 6th best 2-point percentage defense in the nation. I mean, so they're just going to get after it and defend. And that's what could do it for them. If this was the matchup, TCU and Arizona State, I would expect a game like in the 50s or something like that. They're top 20 in the nation in block percentage and in effective field goal percentage. The man to know is Des Cambridge, who interestingly played at Nevada before going to Arizona State. He and his brother, Devin Cambridge, are both on the roster there. Frankie Collins is the distributor. He's the leading assist man. but they're a bad rebounding team. So Arizona State, I actually don't expect them to win this game. I think that would be the better matchup for TCU, just because I think they're the lesser of the two teams, and I think the matchup is better for the Frogs. So it's Nevada under Steve Alford that I'm a little more concerned about. Whereas, like Arizona State is like 70th at Ken Palm, 66 in the net. When we look at Nevada, they're 37th in the net, 44th at Ken Palm. They are riding a 3-game losing streak in 4 of their last 6, but a lot of times teams kind of hit the reset button after the conference tournament. It's like, hey, let's just get done. And like any Big 12 team knows that too well. But I'm with Nevada, despite the fact of them being the last team in the field, they're a more balanced team than Arizona State. Their offense and defense are both like top 60 at Ken Palm. They play a really slow and deliberate pace. So that's something, you just have to play against that. It's harder to speed a team up than to slow them down. They're one of the best free throw shooting teams in the nation, which, so if you're sending them to the lineup bench, they're gonna hit them. They're over 80% for the season. So Jared Lucas is the man to know. 17.3 points a game. Will Baker is a legit 7-foot center. He's got about 13.5 points a game, but only averages 5 rebounds a game as a 7-footer. So they've been out rebounded on the season, Nevada. So there's that. So you got to stop Lucas beyond the 3-point line. He's the only one who's taken more than 100 threes, but he's hitting them at a 37.9% clip, 86% free throw shooter. So you're looking to stop Jared Lucas and Will Baker if that's the matchup.
And so the playing game is always fascinating. It really is one of those things. I feel like you can kind of construct the narrative how you want to. TCU was in this situation a few years back, and they lost to Syracuse, but that was also a really experienced Jim Boeheim team. Jamie Dixon basically said, like, you can find me numbers that show, it's a good thing or a bad thing, but do you feel like it's a good thing for these two teams to kind of get in a rhythm tonight? Obviously, there might be a fatigue factor. It's only one game, but still, where do you fall on sort of that debate on the rest versus rust situation going into Friday?
Exactly. I mean, what you just set up is the two arguments we make. The positive for TCU is you're hopeful that the winner is worn down. Like if you're TCU, you want this game to go to 37 overtimes, right? Like that's the hope. But the negative is I think there really is something to be said for a team that goes ahead and gets in a little bit of a rhythm. We've seen teams like VCU come out of the first 4 and just make a run all the way to the Final Four. UCLA a couple years ago when they got knocked off by Gonzaga with that Jalen Suggs half-court shot at the buzzer. And so the other negative for me, if you're TCU, is you have to prepare for both Arizona State and Nevada instead of just focusing your attention on who your opponent is and then who your probable opponent would be if you win of the other two teams. So instead of preparing for 3 teams this week, Jamie Dixon's staff has been preparing for 4 teams. And so that is kind of a negative. But at the end of the day, you roll the ball out and you go play a basketball game. I think the rest is a big win for Mike Miles. Like, let's not put anything else on that knee, right? So I think all told, it's probably a net gain for TCU.
Okay, I want to do some reckless speculation in a second. Before that, we'll take a quick break. All right, we're back here on Locked On Horned Frogs. And Isaac, I want to give you a chance. This is actually a really good kind of segue here. So you guys you and your podmate Andy Patton have a college basketball bracket breakdown up on the YouTube channel on your podcast feed at the moment. So if people are sitting here on Wednesday afternoon or evening thinking, I got to get this bracket filled out, what can they expect from the Locked On College Basketball bracket breakdown?
Well, basically, we just went region by region looking at – we started with the left side, so y'all don't need to pay attention to that unless you're filling out a bracket. And then we went to the right side to the Midwest and West brackets. And so just kind of went game by game. And then each of our shows this week, we've just taken a region at a time with a little bit more of an even more in-depth breakdown than that. And so if you're really looking for some bracket help, you can certainly tune into those. But I also love interacting with folks on Twitter. So hit me up. Would love to chat with you about stuff. I've got TCU blood in my family. I've got an uncle who's a grad, so I'm always down to help some frogs, man.
I like that. Okay, didn't realize that connection. That's good. So if the Frogs take care of business in round 1,
Yep.
then I'm guessing that Gonzaga can take care of business against Grand Canyon.
They should.
They should. If that's the matchup, just what do you think? Obviously, like that's a team that has been in the tournament forever, has a lot of pedigree. What do you feel? It'll be an interesting battle of pace. I feel like TCU likes to get up and down. Gonzaga really likes to get up and down the floor. Those two teams. Your initial thoughts on that potential matchup?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of a no-brainer that Gonzaga is going to win. We've obviously seen crazier things happen. What up, Virginia losing? But here's the thing. Gonzaga has made the Sweet 16 7 straight years, and I'm afraid it's going to be 8. Like this matchup is where TCU would really miss Eddie Lampkin because of the Drew Timme factor. Drew Timme is just such a load for a college basketball player. And that makes me nervous for TCU, especially because the Horned Frogs, like where you could mitigate that is burying a bunch of threes. And that's not a strength of this team, right? They are 30.6% on the season. And unfortunately, and I know we're not talking a national championship game here, but since the adoption of the three-point shot in the 1986-87 season, we've literally never had a national champion shoot under 32.9% from three. And so like those kind of things just don't bode well. Now, here's the nice thing about the NCAA tournament. It's not a best 4 out of 7 series, in which I think that gives even more of an advantage to Gonzaga. Like with TCU, who knows what could happen in a one-off, right? You go and you start burying some shots. I'm really curious to see what Big 12 teams are doing. Just like, I'm so tired of my conference and just pounding on each other. Who knows what's going to happen with all these Big 12 teams and their matchups? So TCU could get out of conference and be like boat racing people, because that's frankly what I thought they were going to do from the beginning of the season. I know we had the Mike Miles health thing and that Northwestern State loss. I think a lot of people just tuned out after that. No, this team is legit. So I believe Gonzaga is going to win, but I wouldn't be surprised in any way if these Horned Frogs pull it out.
Yeah, and I mean, I think one thing that works in their favor, and you discussed it, is just the Big 12 factor. So the last 2 national titles have come from the Big 12 conference. And I think, Isaac, it's funny. I feel like Big 12 basketball fans are starting to sound more like SEC football fans, and that there's just kind of an elitism of like, all right, you guys really don't understand what we're going through week in and week out. But as a little bit more of an outsider, you know, the double round robin format, the 18 games, all the depth, the good teams there. Is it as good as, you know, we here in Big 12 country, you know, feel like it's cracked up to be? And can you see maybe more than just Baylor, Kansas, and Texas going on a little bit of a run here in March?
That's a great question. Well, it's funny too, because outside of the back-to-back national champions, Baylor in 21, Kansas in 22, the only other Big 12 national champion was Kansas in 08. But this conference, yes, is absolutely loaded. I have said for the majority of this season, I think to that last question you asked me, I think any of this top 6 out of the Big 12 is capable of making a Final Four run. So again, hear me say, even though I think Gonzaga wins that game, I would not be shocked in any way if we woke up on Saturday of Final Four and TCU was one of the teams playing that. I mean, like that could be a legit thing. I think part of what makes the Big 12 so good right now is just having 10 teams as opposed to having more like a lot of the other major conferences do, like the ACC's 15 or the Big 10's 14. So let's talk ACC. They for years have been the predominant team in predominant conference, in all of college basketball. But that was when they only had 9 teams, kind of similar to what the Big 12 has now. But then you add Miami and Virginia Tech and Boston College, Syracuse, Louisville, Notre Dame, Pittsburgh, and you lose Maryland. And so now in a 15-team conference, there are always going to be bottom feeders. It's just the nature of what happens with team dynamics. And so this year, yes, Big 12 is 100% as good as it thinks it is. If you take TCU or Oklahoma State and put them in the Pac-12, they're right there contending with UCLA and Arizona. I fully believe that. Now, the question is what happens next year, right? Because you start to add more. I mean, I think Houston, if they were in the Big 12 this year, that would have been super fun. But so that's just something to watch out for, is what happens to the Big 12 as it gets more teams. But for 2023, this conference is legit.
And so the West region, I mean, you got a little Big 12 flavor with Kansas there as the 1, UCLA the 2, you got Gonzaga and St. Mary's involved as well. What is your sort of looking at that region as a whole? Who do you think will emerge, and who are some of your favorites that are going to come out of there in the West?
It's funny because usually I love the chaos. I'm all about like, where can we find some upsets? This is the one bracket where I have all of the top 4 seeds advancing to the Sweet 16. So Kansas is going to get by Howard easily. And then Arkansas and Illinois are both talented teams at the 8-9 game, but both have not reached their ceiling. They've been up and down. I think Kansas takes care of either of those easily. And then UConn, for a long part of this season, was playing as what I thought was the best team in the country, and they've returned to that form. So I actually have them upsetting Kansas to go to the Elite 8.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then on the bottom half of the bracket, UCLA, they, for me, ahead of the Jalen Clark injury last week, were going to be a 1 seed ahead of Purdue. Purdue's in that same boat with TCU as being sub 33% in 3-point shooting. I just don't fully believe in Purdue. So as you fill out your brackets, folks, do not select the Boilermakers as your national champion. There's your nugget. I also have Gonzaga beating UCLA. I think with Jalen Clark being out, they're also without Adembona, or at least were last weekend. We'll have to see if he plays in the NCAA tournament. But I have Gonzaga upsetting UCLA and Gonzaga actually moving on to the Final Four.
Okay, I like that. That's a good sort of, not out of nowhere, but a little different path than some other people are going with. Okay, Isaac, who's your national champ? Who's your national champ as we sit here today?
Well, I don't like to say it because I grew up in Georgia and I don't like to hear these words coming out of my mouth, but it's the Alabama Crimson Tide. They before we're not going to get into the Brandon Miller stuff, whatever.
Right.
But before all that news came out, they were winning SEC games by an average of over 20 points a game. They hit a lull in the 4 games to end the regular season after that, where they went 3-1 and they were only winning by 3, 2, and 5, and then lost to A&M to end the regular season. But then in the SEC tournament, they were right back to that team that we had seen in the first half of conference play, winning by 23, 11, and 19 to race their way to the overall number 1 seed. I believe they're legit. I know there's all the noise surrounding Brandon Miller, but this dude is insanely good, and he's surrounded by a whole cast of other players who are very, very good. Nate Oates has that team going. They can shoot. They can defend like crazy. I believe in Alabama.
And before we go, the Eddie Lampkin, kind of fiasco has been interesting.
That's a good word for it.
It is a good word for it. And I mean, in fairness to Eddie, I think there's a mental health situation going on here that I don't have all the proper information to comment on. But just as a player, he is now in the transfer portal.
Right.
I think when he's fully engaged, like, he's a really good passer. He's obviously got that size that you talked about that you can't replicate. But it's intriguing because we didn't really see him at full force this year between the injury and some other things going on. What do you think the market will be like for him, with the teams? And I don't know if you have a place where he lands, but just how do you think teams kind of evaluate him as he hits the open market now?
It's a great question. Part of it is we're so early in the transfer portal. It's Wednesday as we record this. The transfer portal has been open since Monday. We'll be open for 60 days. So that's like May 11th, if I can count the calendar right. And so I think the market is going to be huge for him, right? Part of it is listen, mental health is a very real thing that I'm so grateful that our country is beginning to wrap its collective brains around. No real pun intended there, I guess. But, teams are going to need to do their due diligence to check in on him and his health. I'm sure there will be back channeling with Jamie Dixon and or the staff to just say, like, hey, help us wrap our brains around what we'd be getting if we brought in Eddie Lampkin. And a lot, like, you hate it because it's not on him, right? Like, that's what's in his head, and you have to honor and respect that. But at the same time, it is part of the package you get if you bring him in to play on your team. So I think what teams are going to have to balance is it worth the potential of him having some mental health issues to get what an uber talented and helpful player inside he would be? For me, I think it's worth it, but we'll have to wait and see. So I think there's going to be, yes, to your question, a really big market to land his services.
It's Isacc Shade. He hosts Locked On College Basketball, also Locked On Tar Heels, if you want to check either of those out. And Isaac, before we go, let people know where they can find you on social and the best place to subscribe, all the good things.
For sure. I am most active on Twitter at Isacc Shade. I've got Facebook and Instagram, but that's just because you have to, right? So you can find all my stuff there on Twitter. Seriously, I said it earlier, would love to interact with you. Check out Locked On College Basketball. We have a blast. It's the best time of the year. March is Christmas. Steven, thanks so much for the great job you do. Good luck to the to the frogs. I didn't mean to say horns like this kind. I meant like horned frogs. So that's where we were going. Good luck to the frogs in the NCAA tournament.
That's okay, Isaac. Thank you. We're having to deal with the fact that Texas is a legit team, which is always a tough thing for every other school in the state. But it'll be fun to see how it all plays out over the next month or so. This is Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team every day.